Hello everybody and welcome to another video in our Android starter course learning Kotlin. So in this video we're actually going to be looking into something called Jetpack Compose, and this is just going to be a very high level quick overview, just enough to get you ready for your next assignment and your first little Compose project that we're going to have. So basically Jetpack Compose is Android's modern toolkit for building native UIs on Android applications. It's going to simplify and accelerate our UI development, and basically it's going to let us write the same apps with less code and with much more intuitive ways of going about it, writing these UIs using actually Kotlin code instead of XMLs like the old Vue system. So let's jump right into it here. So if you look at your new project window, now if you have a newer version of Android Studio, if you've updated, you should see your first empty activity up here actually has this little cube inside of it, and that cube is the Jetpack Compose logo. So now if you have a new version, then your empty activity is going to by default be a compose activity. But if you don't, you need to look down here and look for one that says compose activity, or you need to update your Android Studio, because on the older versions, the default activity was this view activity. We don't want to do that. So go ahead and select empty activity and go next. And I'm just going to name this compose intro, and go ahead and click finish on that. And while this is all loading, you'll notice a few things that look a little bit different. So if you go into main activity, first you have this compose intro theme. So basically compose intro is the name of our project, and then theme is just going to be the theme for your project that's created by default. And then in here you have your surface. You get a modifier, which we'll talk about what that is later, and then you get a color with that. And then finally, you're calling a greeting function. And if you look down here, you'll see that greeting function is right here, and it's annotated at composable. And again, we'll talk about what that means in a minute. But basically, you've got your text, and then in that text, you're assigning a parameter for hello, and then whatever the name is. In this case, Android is the name. And then you also have a modifier down there. Now, if you look in your project window over here, if you go into Res, you'll notice there's no layout folder like they used to have on the Vue system. So that's new. All of your UI is actually going to be written within these composable functions in the Kotlin code itself. And now if you look in Gradle scripts and go into your app level Gradle scripts and go down to the bottom, you'll see a bunch of now composed dependencies. And you'll notice none of these have any versions on them here. So the reason why these don't have or need any versions on them is because of this little, this line right here. The BOM stands for your bill of materials. And basically this is going to be the compose package that includes all of the compatible versions for all of these other dependencies that you're going to use within the project. So as long as you are including your bill of materials, well, then you don't actually need to specify the versions on anything else. In fact, you shouldn't specify the versions on any of the other dependencies, because the bill of materials is going to actually cover all of the compatible versions for you. So you definitely want to use that instead. So now going back to main activity, you'll notice we have up here, just like we used to have on our layout design or layout editor, we have our code, and then we have our split and our design. Well, what's that about? Let's go ahead and just open up our phone here. So let's open up a phone. We'll stick that on the side, and then in here, let's click on that split design, and you get a warning saying a successful build is needed before the preview can be displayed. Okay, that's fine. Let's go ahead and click build and refresh. You can also click build up top, and it should do that for you. And once that completes, you'll notice here, you get a little preview of basically what used to be our layout. Now this is our compose. Whatever compose is building, this is what you're going to see in your preview. So if I come over here and if I take that Android and I change it to Tim, you'll notice nothing changes, even though it just said it rendered a new preview, nothing changed. And that's because this is our main activity, which calls our greeting composable. But if you scroll down a little bit, you'll notice another composable in here. And this one is marked preview. So you actually have a separate call from your main activity to your composables, and then your preview to your composables over here. So if I change this one to Tim, you'll notice now when it renders our preview, it actually changes it to Hello Tim. And another thing you'll notice here is that it's only taking up a tiny bit of the screen. Obviously, this is not our entire phone. So basically, this preview is showing you everything that you're rendering right now. So if I was to go ahead and run this on my phone in my emulator over here, it's going to take this piece that's being rendered in the composable, and it just sticks it real small up in the corner. And that's obviously not what we want. That's not a good design. Let's start looking into how we can change that. So if I come into my greeting composable, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to copy all of this. And then I'm going to make a new Cotton class or file. And this is not going to be a class, just a file. I'm going to name it greeting screen. And then I'm going to paste all of that in here. And now I go back to my split view. Because this is a new file, I'm actually going to need to build and refresh my code one more time to see that preview. And we have our text. So here, the green text field, it's a predefined composable that Jetpack Compose is actually given to us. So within that, one of the parameters is the actual text I want to display on there, which in this case is just going to be hello name. And then you have a modifier. Well, what's a modifier? Basically, a modifier, you can change all kinds of stuff that's related to this composable. So in here, I can, let's say I don't like how the edges of my text are right up against the side. So I can come in here and I can say dot padding. And if I just take maybe 16 dp, which is 16 data pixels, go ahead and import that, import padding, and then dp. We'll import that as well. And now give that time to render. And over in the window, now you see we have a nice big border around our Hello Tim. So that's cool. That's one thing we can do with a modifier. Another thing that we can do, I'll go ahead and show you here. I can add a border. So let's just say I want my border and we want a width of maybe 4 data pixels, and we want it to be color green. Import that one as well, and then let that render again. Okay, cool. Now we have our text field and we've got a green border around it, and it says Hello Tim. We could add a background to this as well. Background, we could say color dot light gray, and then let's see that render, and there we go. You'll notice we get our light gray color, but you'll also notice we only get that directly over the text. And the reason for that is basically the order that these are applied is going to be from the top down. So it's going to apply a border, which is the green, and then it will apply our padding of 16 data pixels on all sides around that. And then it's going to apply a light gray background on what's left of that, which is only the Hello Tim text, which that doesn't look so good. But if we take that same background and we paste it right above there, now you'll see the entire box has that light gray background on it. So this order on your modifier stack is actually pretty important. So there's one text field, and let's say I want to add another text field down here. So we've got another text field, and in here we're just going to say text equals how are you today? And then go ahead and let that render. but you'll notice a problem here, right? And that text pretty much has written itself right over our other text field, except it's actually a little above it, but that's only because we have this 16 data pixel padding. So if we added that same padding down here, the modifier equals modifier dot padding 16 data pixels, and now you'll see our text is right over that old text. So what's going on here? Well, basically, we have we have one text field, and then we have another text field, but we don't have any way that we've specified how we want these arranged on the screen. And if we don't specify that, it's just going to stick everything, just like it did when we built it and ran it on our phone. It's going to stick everything by default just in the top left corner. So what we need to do is introduce some organization structure to this. So one thing that we can use is something called a column. So I'm going to go ahead and add a column in here. And if I take both of these text fields and just leave, even without passing any parameters into that column, if I go ahead and paste those in, well, now you see we've got our two text fields and they're laid out on top of each other instead. So what's going on here is a column, just like in Microsoft Excel or another spreadsheet program, a column is a way of organizing composables on the screen in a vertical fashion, meaning it's going to put one on top of the next one. So that basically that's how you arrange things vertically. And in this column, there's several different parameters that we can have. First, I could do, let's add a modifier to this one. Modifier equals modifier. And then in here, we could say dot fill max. There's three of them here. So I'll show you what fill max width does. Now you'll see it stretch that out across our entire screen. If I change that from fill max width to fill max height, you could probably guess what that's going to do is it's going to make it as tall. It's going to stretch it out across our entire phone screen, or at least the available portion of that phone screen. And now the last one there was fill max size. So if we do fill max size, now you can see it's filled up our entire screen. And these are on top of each other, but they're still both up in the top left corner. Well, what can we do to fix that? We can introduce some more parameters here. So the first one that we can do is called vertical arrangement. And arrangement is basically just going to arrange items vertically within our column. So because our column has filled the max size of our phone, if I do vertical arrangement equals, you've got three options here: space around, space between, and space evenly. So if I just do space evenly, you'll see that now we've got a gap beneath, in the middle, and then on top, and they're all about the same. If I do space between, you've got no gap on top and no gap on bottom, but a big gap in between the middle. So basically, if I had a third one, it would be right in the middle and you would have an even gap between those, but I don't for now. But if I do space around, well, that's going to arrange it now so that I have a big gap in the middle and then a smaller gap on the top and the bottom. So basically, the gap on the top, the margins on the top and the bottom, if you add them together, are going to be equal to the gap in between. So I'm just going to set that back to space evenly now. And then, I mean, it's not a good UI, but basically you understand what the arrangement does. But there's one more thing here, because what if we want to arrange it still within the column, but we want it maybe in the middle of the screen instead of lined up on the left side? So that's going to be called horizontal alignment, and we can just do center horizontally on that. And now you have everything there in the middle. Another thing I'll mention here, you've got this column and you've got this modifier fill max size. If I came down here, and if down here I said dot fill max width, you'll notice I can also stretch out this text box. And now that text box is going to fill the entire width of our phone. So I don't actually want that there for now, so I'm going to get rid of that, and that'll set it back to exactly what it was like. Another thing in these text boxes, if you look at this layout over here, this text is actually really small, and that's going to be difficult to read. So we can change that. We can say font size, and here we're going to say 40, and then SP. And again, we use SP instead of DP, because DP, which stands for data pixel, is going to be, that's our standard size throughout the application, but SP, we use that especially for text because with the accessibility options, where if someone's hard of seeing and they want to zoom in on something or they want higher text, SP is going to auto adjust for that. So we always use SP for text. So you can change your font size. Let's say I don't really like that color. Well, I can change that too. Color equals material theme dot color scheme dot on surface, and that'll set a color for us. I guess on surface might have been black in this case. That's okay. Now down here I can set a style. The style equals, and I'm just going to say material theme dot typography dot headline medium. But actually, if you look in here, you'll see you've got display, title, headline, body, label, a whole bunch of these different things, title. So you have a whole bunch of different options for the style. So you'll definitely play around with those and see what they all look like. I'm just going to set it to headline medium for now. So there's all sorts of different things that you can mess around with, even just within this individual text box. So down here, same thing with this text box. We've got a text and a modifier, but we can also add a size to that. So I'll just do that and make this one just 40 SP as well, just to match the other one. And now, let's say after this text box, I want to add some buttons. Well, again, there's no drag and drop. So to do that, all we do is type button and then hit enter. And here we have a button, and that should load. And there you go. There's our button, and there's nothing on it, but we can definitely fix that. So this is inside the button. And if you come up to the parameters and just type text, you'll notice that there's actually no text parameter for this button. So what we do instead is we're going to take our text composable and we're going to write our text composable, another text composable inside of our button composable. So text and text equals, we'll just call this our find button. And now you see within our preview, it says fine. Again, that text is kind of small, so we can make that bigger as well. Font size equals, let's just say, I don't know, 28 SP. And you'll see as the font inside the button gets bigger, the button itself also gets bigger to fill that. So now if I add another button, so I'm just going to copy that, paste it, and then instead of fine, I'm going to say bad. Now we have two buttons here. We've got two text fields and two buttons. You can see we're still keeping with our centered within the column and then arrangement vertically with them all spaced evenly in between. But this doesn't really look good. We're stacking everything on top of one another, but what if I want to put them side by side? Well, just like we have a column here that we're arranging everything vertically in, so you also have a row that you can arrange everything horizontally in. So if I come up here and I add a row, and then within that row, if I were to take these two buttons, cut them, and then stick them in there, you can see now in our preview here, we've got our two text fields on top of each other, and then those are on top of now our two buttons here. Okay, so the buttons are there, but they're also right next to each other. So how do we fix that? Well, we need to pass some parameters into our row. So up here, I'm going to add a So just like on the column, we had vertical arrangement and then horizontal alignment. So in the row, it's actually going to be opposite. On the row, you're going to have horizontal arrangement. And then that one, I'm just going to say space evenly. You have the same three options here. So if I do space evenly, and then you also have vertical alignment, and I'm going to set that equal to center vertically. But you'll notice that as I add those two and as our preview finishes rendering, these buttons actually haven't moved at all. Well, that's because our row is only going to take up as much space as it has to unless we tell it otherwise. So if I only have two buttons, then a row is going to take up exactly enough space for two buttons inside of that and nothing else. So if I want it to take up more room, what I need to do is add a modifier to that. So modifier equals modifier dot. We don't want to do fill max size, but what we can do is fill max width, and that should stretch it out across the entire phone. Oh, I spelled that wrong. Modifier equals modifier dot fill max size. Okay, so now that that's filling the max size of our screen, we've got everything we need. We can run that on our phone and see how that looks. And I mean, it's an ugly app, but basically you get the idea of how this is working. And now I have these two buttons, I can click on them, but they're not doing anything. So basically we need to define what happens when we click on them. And in this button, you have this onClick parameter, and inside these two brackets here is where you're going to put anything you want to happen. But let's say I want to click on this button here, the fine, and then it's going to change this message to something like, oh, I'm glad you're doing fine. Or if I click the bad, it's going to say the opposite. So how would I do that? Well, basically, we don't want to put any, I mean, we're just hard coding in a string right now, and we can't do it like that. We could stick a variable in there, but where are we going to store that variable? Because the way that Compose works is any time that some of my input parameters for any of these composables are changing, it's going to redraw everything. So if I was to put a variable right here and say val, I put my string equals, and then I take this message and I put that right there, and then if I put the text down here equals my string, well, anytime, even if down here in the clickable, I change that my string to a different value, well, anytime we redraw this column, then it's going to reset that variable, and then it's going to basically reset that message as well. So that's not what we want to do. Instead, I'm going to create a new file, a new Kotlin class or file, and this is going to be a data class. And basically, this is just going to store the state for our application, or for our, really, in this case, just for that one text field. But really, this is going to be the state for the entire UI. So Kotlin class or file, data class, and I'm going to call it greeting state. Now, within this greeting state, I'm just going to have one parameter, val message string, and the string is just going to by default equal how are you today, which was our initial message. And then we could take that and write that back in there, but into our screen, that is. But we don't want to access that state directly from our composables. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a view model, and I'm going to store that state within the view model. So back over here, new, and we're going to say Kotlin class or file. This is going to be a class, and this is going to be a greeting view model, which will extend the class view model. Okay, now within here, I basically need to store a state. So I could say val state equals mutable state of, and then that's going to be a greeting state. We'll have to go ahead and import that mutable state of. So that would give me a reference to my state, and we would be able to set that and then access the view model within our UI. But this is actually not how we want to store state, because basically, because it's not private, we can read it from the outside, but we can also update it from the outside. But I don't want people to be able to update this state from the outside. So really what I want is I want this to be a private state. But the problem is if I make that private, well, then they can't update it, but they can't read it either. So what's a good practice here is you have one private variable that you name underscore state. And then after that, we're going to do val state with no underscore. And this is just going to be a state of type greeting state. And then this is going to be equal to underscore state. So now we have a private state variable that no other components can mess with. But we also have our public state variable that's just storing that value so that they can read it without being able to write it. But there's one more thing that we need in this view model, and that's if we were to actually click on one of these buttons, we need something to perform that logic to update our state variable. So I'm going to add a function down here, and we're just going to call this fun set message. It's going to take one parameter that's going to be a Boolean for if they are fine or not. And then in here, we're just going to say state underscore state dot value equals when fine. And then inside here, if it's true, we are going to set that equal to state dot value dot copy. And then our message is going to be equal to I'm glad you are fine. And then if that's equal to false, we are going to do underscore state dot value dot copy. And then our message is going to be equal to I'm sorry to hear that. Hopefully you feel better soon. So now that we have that, we should be good to go back to that greeting screen. But actually, before we do that, one more thing I'll mention. So here you have this underscore state dot value dot copy. And basically what we're doing here is this dot copy function is going to take every different field within our state's value, which in this case is our greeting state, which happens to, or not the screen, our greeting state, which happens to only have one value message here. But what this copy is going to do is if I just did this empty, it's going to do exactly what it sounds like it's going to do, which is create a copy of our state. But if I have that populated, it's going to copy every field except the fields that I specify in the parameter. So in this case, it would copy everything except message, which we don't actually have anything else except message in our state, so it doesn't really matter. But anyway, that's what's going on with that state.copy. Now, if I go back to my greeting screen here, we can get rid of that. We don't want to do that. Instead, what we're going to want to do in this greeting screen, basically at the top, inside the parameter, we're going to pass a view model in, and then that view model is going to contain the state that we need for this UI. So view model, greeting view model, and then inside here, I'm going to say val state equals view model dot state dot value. Okay, so now that we have that state value, I can come down here, and instead of using a local variable for that, all I need to do is state.message. And now if I update this, it's gonna read that text field in from that state. There's only one more thing that we need to do here, and basically we need to update these on clicks for this button down here. So I'm gonna get rid of that, and we're gonna say view model, view model dot set message, and because this first button is our find button, I'm going to say true, and basically we're going to copy that and use that for this one down here as well. So view model dot set message, and this one is going to be false. And now the only thing we need to update down here is our greeting. Or sorry, not our greeting, our preview, because basically we have this greeting function that takes a name with no default, a modifier that has a default, so we don't have to specify a modifier. And then we have a view model, again, with no default. So to be able to do this, to be able to pass that in our preview, we need to define a view model up here. So right above that grading, all I'm going to do is I'm going to say val view model equals grading view model. And then basically we're going to say name equals Tim, comma, and then we're going to say view model equals view model. And that's all we need there. I'm going to copy that, come back on over to main activity where we're calling this function again, and we need to specify our view model there as well. Now, let's go ahead and run that program again. And if you look in our screen, it looks the same, but if I click one of these buttons, now it's changing that. If I click fine, it says, I'm glad you are fine. If I click bad, I get this big long text. What's going on here? How do we fix that? Well, in our text field, we increased the text size, but we didn't space it out any better, so we need to do that. Come back into here. We could add some padding inside there or some spacers or something like that, but instead of that, I'm going to show you another option that we have here in the text field. And basically what we can do is we can say, instead of having this run on to the next line, there's an option in here for max lines. And if I set my max lines equal to 1, and then if I were to run it, it would only give me that first line, but then I don't know that I'm missing something. So another nice thing you can have here is an overflow option. And if I set that equal to text overflow ellipsis, and if we run that now, you'll see, how are you today? If I click bad, oh, that didn't work. Of course that didn't work because I modified my text within my button. So let's fix that. We don't want that there. Let's go up here. Okay, so here's our text field that we want to modify. Basically, we have an option here for just putting all of that on one line instead of overflowing onto all of the next lines. So if I say just max lines equals 1, that's going to only give me the top line. And then so that we know that something's missing, I can say overflow. And if I set that equal to text overflow ellipsis and run my program again, if I click the bad button, now it says, I'm sorry to hear that, and then it just trails off with that ellipsis. So there's all kinds of different options here. We obviously didn't go over all of them in this video. I will put a link to the Android documentation for Compose and starting Compose down in the description below, so make sure to check that out. Basically, in this video, we covered enough material for you to go ahead and get started with your next project in this class, which is going to be pretty much just building a tic-tac-toe app. So from what we covered today, you should be in a pretty good position to be able to start building and even finish a tic-tac-toe app using Jetpack Compose, coupled with all the Kotlin we've learned together as well. So go ahead and give that a shot. Even if you're not in this class, trying a tic-tac-toe app will definitely be a good challenge for a beginner, and it's definitely a fun little project for you. If you found this Jetpack Compose introduction helpful, definitely like this video and subscribe to our channel, and we will definitely see you back here again on a future video.